What are the repercussions that Dr. Fauci may face?
You know, it's against the law to disrupt or obstruct a congressional investigation. There is a charge that can be voted upon called contempt of Congress. It's a resolution. If it passes, it will be sent to the Department of Justice with the recommendation of prosecuting. There is a legal question that attaches to this. Can the Fifth Amendment be taken, or can you ask for the Fifth Amendment protections when you've already been granted immunity through a pardon? I don't think this has ever been truly and fully adjudicated. There aren't that many people with pardons that have come before a congressional committee and refused to testify, so it's a limited number. But I think there are some precedents, but a court ultimately would have to determine, does the Fifth Amendment apply to someone who already has a pardon? The very last question I asked him was very specific to his pardon. Given the years that you were pardoned for, during that period of time, did you destroy records? And he refused to answer that. And I think he is protected completely. All it takes is an honest answer. Even if he has destroyed records, which we believe he did, his assistant had an email that we put forward that said, "Hey, Dr. Fauci, congratulations. I deleted tons of your emails over the weekend." So we do believe he destroyed records. That's against the law. And I think that he could have answered that honestly, and he wouldn't have had any problem, no criminality because of his pardon. But in choosing not to answer it, I think it is obstruction of Congress, and I think there is a very real chance that he could be prosecuted for that.
Is that what you expected him to do today, Senator Paul? And do you believe that, therefore, re-emphasizes the point you've long made, that there is something disingenuous about Dr. Fauci's engagement with the public on this particular subject?
Well, there absolutely is something disingenuous. He's said the opposite privately from publicly. Privately, he found out in January of 2020 that the infection did not start in the wet market from wild animals. The original infection came from people not connected to the wet market. But for 5 years, including on most of the network shows, he has said repeatedly over and over, it came from the wet market. So he said the opposite in public to things he said in private. The virologists that he got together at the end of January in 2020, they all told him it looks like the virus has been manipulated. It has a special cleavage site called a furin cleavage site that doesn't occur in that family of viruses. There is suspicious aspects to this sequence for the virus. And yet publicly, they all circled wagons and a few weeks later produced a paper saying this is not a laboratory construct. Very, very certain language, not conjecture, not possible. They said it was not. About a month later, a group of scientists then said it was all conspiracy theory. I wasn't even involved in the debate. The first year, I was concerned about the virus and what we should do health-wise, but I really wasn't concerned with the origins. But the interesting thing is they circled the wagons, but all along they were still saying privately, oh my goodness, I think this might have come from the lab. Well, they're publicly saying no way. Why? Because they all were involved with funding it. Primarily, Anthony Fauci approved the funding, not only of this, but for a decade before. The most famous gain-of-function experiment is Ron Faucia out of the Netherlands. The NIAID, Fauci's group, funded it, and they took the bird flu, which has about 50% human mortality, but fortunately doesn't infect humans very well and doesn't go human to human. They said, what if we do 8 mutations and make it aerosolized and spread between humans? That is sort of like a Frankenstein experiment. And much of the scientific world came out and said, oh my goodness, the risks of this outweigh the benefits, except for one prominent person, Anthony Fauci, who said, oh no, the knowledge we gain definitely outweighs the benefits here, or outweighs the risk. And he was all in for gain of function, not just with COVID. He was all in with gain of function for a decade. So he does bear responsibility here for perhaps the worst medical decision in our history, and that is to fund dangerous research in a less than safe lab in a totalitarian country, creating respiratory viruses that have increased pathogenicity and increased transmissibility.
And what do you say, Senator Paul, when I bring up the fact that the Chinese Communist Party did everything it could in the earliest stages of this to deny the ability for you or anyone else to independently understand what the origins were, or who even were patients 1, 2, and 3? Whistleblowers were jailed. Some died in prison. Already patients died in prison. They destroyed all of the wet market evidence. They shut down the lab. Isn't there any culpability that you're concerned about in that direction?
Absolutely. And the earliest sequences of this, we only found out about the sequence. The government of China was refusing to give this. A brave Chinese scientist put it online at 2 in the morning on like January 11th, 2020. So yes, I wrote a book about this and dedicated it to the young ophthalmologist. I'm an ophthalmologist. The young ophthalmologist who died was trying to warn people that the X-ray findings, the CT of the chest, looked suspiciously like SARS from 2003. Meanwhile, the Chinese government was saying, nothing to see here, doesn't go human to human. But in that same vein, Anthony Fauci also tried to say it came from nature, and that's very different than coming from a lab. If it comes from nature, it's typically sluggish. It doesn't go human to human well. That's what happened in 2003. And you know what? Quarantine and other normal things worked. The reason they didn't work for COVID is we believe that the virus was adapted in the lab to be very transmissible. You saw how infectious it was. You could look at somebody 30 feet away and get this thing. It was incredibly infectious, but that's because we believe it was adapted for humans. If you take COVID-19 in February of 2020 and you try to infect a bat, it won't infect bats. We can't find an intermediate animal that was plausible that it even infects. They did an experiment on a supercomputer in Australia. I think it was Oracle supercomputer. They said, which animal does it fit most better? If you do the lock and key of the virus, which cells does it infect most perfectly? Humans. That doesn't sound like an animal virus. That sounds like an animal virus that has been changed into a human virus. So everything points towards humans. So should there be some responsibility for Anthony Fauci, who is an advocate of gain-of-function research, will not tell the truth, and will not admit that it might have happened on his watch at his behest?
Just to pick up on what you just said, Senator Paul, because I think it's important. Might have happened. We will never know for certain, will we? The absolute origin?
It's all about sort of estimates. Even the scientists who said it came from nature were still privately, even after they wrote a paper saying it didn't come from the lab, were saying, I'm 30%, uncertain that it might have come from the lab. I'm 50% uncertain. But there's a lot of evidence that points towards it. 80,000 animals were tested in the market, and afterwards, none of them had COVID. They checked antibodies for people who handle the animals, the people that are the butchers in the market. In 2003, when they did this, and the Chinese did the testing, in 2003, they found that the animals had positive virus, a variety of the viruses. They also found that the handlers all had antibodies, a much higher rate than the general population. And then they quarantined, but the disease didn't go very fast. In 2002, 2003, only about 8,000 people got it. It had a 10% mortality. 800 people died, but quarantine worked. The reason quarantine didn't work here is this thing had been adapted so that it could be transmitted asymptomatically, which is even the opposite of most flus. One reason flus die out is because people are sick and they stay home. One, everybody gets the flu and they get immunity, but also people that are sick tend not to go out. With COVID, people tend not to be sick, and so it continues to spread. We think that happened in a lab, not naturally.
Before I let you go, Senator Paul, and I appreciate your time, you've talked in today's hearing, and many Republicans did, about the importance of transparency, accountability, and the public being capable of handling hard information. Today, on his X account, the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, wrote the following. Today, Rand Paul wants to force an 85-year-old Dr. Anthony Fauci to address the American people, but refuses to ask the same of 84-year-old Mitch McConnell. In the spirit of transparency, does the Senate, does the American public need to know more about Senator McConnell's health, his well-being, and when, if ever, he'll be able to capably return to the Senate?
I think they're reasonable questions, and people are asking those questions. I think there's been a slowness to reveal his health status, but that's sort of his decision. It's not like he's calling me up and saying, hey, should I release my records? So I think there's been a slowness to release those records, but I think the ultimate decision has been made. He made this decision a year ago not to run for re-election because he is getting older and he has more health problems. So we have had a variety of people miss time, though, and there has been a certain amount of circumspectness John Fetterman missed months and months, and I was one of those who said, lay off the guy. He's got health problems. Let him recover. Senator Lujan was out with a significant stroke for a long time. Mark Kirk was out for nearly a year. Senator Johnson from South Dakota was out for a long time. So I don't know. We're human, and we have health problems too. I think it is best to try to reveal, particularly when you miss your job, what's wrong with you and when you'll be back. But sometimes you don't know. For all I know, if there was an important vote, he might be here today. There are many votes that happen, but there hasn't been anything so far where he's been the deciding vote. And look, I'm one who's had many, many political differences with Mitch McConnell, but I think, we ought to treat each other with a little bit of respect. And I would do the same whether he was a Republican or a Democrat.
Senator Rand Paul, Kentucky Republican, I appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.